Hello, everyone. Welcome to Cinema Mancuso, and this is Notes on the News. I'm Peter Mancuso, and this is the show where I break down the biggest stories in film, media, and entertainment and give you my thoughts. If you're just joining us live tonight, super happy to have you. If at any point during the show you have any comments or questions or anything like that related to any of the topics that I'm going to cover, feel free to drop them in the chat. I'll do my best to keep an eye on them. Usually I don't get to take a look until I finish talking about a topic and kind of look at it before we move on. But if you have any kind of comments like that, would love to see those, kind of get a conversation started. And if you haven't yet, hit the like button on this live stream. It's my obligation to tell you because it actually really does help. So please do that. And if you haven't subscribed, we're so close to 100 subscribers. I think we're at at the time of this recording, we're at 96. So if you haven't already, please subscribe, or tell your friends to go subscribe. If you're watching this after the fact, same deal. Leave a comment if you have any questions or comments about any of the topics I'm going to cover. This is the third weekend in a row. I know it's Monday, but it's the third weekend in a row that I've been traveling and been swamped. So hopefully going forward, this will be a little bit easier to get these episodes kind of off the ground. Kind of had to rush today to kind of get everything ready, but I think there's a lot of really great stuff here. Give me 1 second. Sorry. Okay, let's take a look at the box office from this past weekend. So if you've been following my channel, or just the American box office over the past couple weeks, the summer season seems to have started several times. I feel like it started kind of in April. People were saying oh, this is the beginning of the summer season, and then there was a movie that didn't do well, and then it was oh, never mind, it's actually starting in the end of April, and then something would do well and then not do well, and be oh, it's actually starting now. So we're into June at this point. There's no confusion here. We are in the summer movie season. And the box office has just been just to be completely honest, has been disappointing. Even in post-COVID terms, the box office this summer season, which I think I think we can say at least from the end of April, which seems to be the new summer season, has just been abysmal. That's not true. Abysmal is maybe the wrong word, but definitely disappointing. This weekend brought in domestically $65 million total, which was a 37% drop from the past weekend, which makes some sense because, there's really were no big movies opening this week, but considering that last weekend was also fairly disappointing in terms of, I think it was, one of the worst Memorial Day weekend box offices in, 30 years or something, so that makes a little bit of sense, but again, it's still disappointing to see. But again, you have to look at this stuff long term. There are going to be these ebbs and flows, but it is a little disappointing to see, again, a 37% drop, when this should be the busiest part of the year. So, in terms of some openings, super quick, we basically at number 7, 8, and 9 in the top 10. At number 7, we have, I don't know how I'm going to pronounce this, Haikyuu? The exclamation point, the dumpster battle, which I guess is some anime film. I honestly, sorry, it's not on my radar. So if you're watching this and you're a Haikyuu dumpster battle fan, I apologize. Brought in only about $3.5 million for the weekend, but this brings its worldwide total to $80 million, 80. So clearly, without even needing to look into it, it's obviously been having, its run worldwide, probably mostly in Japan. So that kind of, this is really just anything that it makes in the United States at this point is just icing on the cake. Also, at number 8 and 9, we have In a Violent Nature and Ezra coming in at 2.1 and 1.2 million respectively. Again, these are smaller indie films. This is a sidebar. I have a bone to pick because in order to do my job of both doing reviews, but then also, making box office predictions, I gotta know what's actually opening in theaters and what's opening wide, right? So technically, the definition for a wide release has been 600 theaters or more. And typically, I use the website firstshowing.net that I have found in the past to be fairly reliable. But apparently, Box Office Mojo has a different release schedule that will have different movies. And not only will they have different movies, but a movie will be listed as opening wide on First Showing, and then it will be, say, limited on Box Office Mojo. So I was very confused, because I was trying to make predictions for these two movies, In a Violent Nature and Ezra, and I couldn't find any predictions. So I was like, okay, so that maybe it's not opening wide and no one's making box office predictions. These open in like over 1,000 theaters, which obviously is a small wide release, but it is still technically a wide release. So that's just a sidebar. It really annoys me, but in any case, that's why I didn't have any predictions last week if you were watching the live stream. But so this week is definitely dominated by returning content. Right? Things that are continuing into their second, third, fourth weeks. Things continuing directly into their second frame this week. We have the Garfield movie and Furiosa. So if you remember from last week, they basically were playing kind of ping pong back with which one would get the top spot. Ultimately, Furiosa got the number one spot at the domestic box office for the weekend. But now it's flipped. So Garfield is now at number one, bringing about 14 million, roughly, give or take. It actually jumped from second to first place, like I said, and now in its second frame. And only a 42% drop. And I say only, like, of course, you'd want to see less than that, but that's not awful, right? Especially considering that the film has not gotten, like, super stellar reviews or anything. This brings its domestic total to about 52 million 52 million domestically, 152 million worldwide, off of just a $60 million budget. So there's a reason why studios make movies like this, right? You know, animated films based off of recognizable IP, because ultimately if you can keep the cost down, they make their budgets back, right? You definitely would like to see a better domestic return for a movie like this. It's a little disappointing probably to see that that the domestic box office only accounts for about a third of the worldwide box office, but in any case, it seems like the Garfield movie is on track to, make back its money, if not make a little bit of profit, right? And then, of course, it surpassed the film that beat it last weekend, Furiosa, a Mad Max saga, which, again, sidebar, I hate that title, because that makes it sound like Furiosa is, like, Mad Max is the saga. Furiosa is not a Mad Max saga. Furiosa is part of the Mad Max saga. This does not matter, but it just really, really bugs me. So, like I had said, it was in number one, in the number one spot last week. It is now dropped from first to third in its second frame, suffering a 59% drop. Oof. Not the absolute worst that we've seen ever, but definitely not good, right? Especially considering that it had a pretty disappointing opening box office to begin with. This brings its domestic total to about 50 million and its worldwide total to 114, which, sounds decent, but this is all off of a $168 million budget. So, fairly expensive film. I have not seen it. I have heard really, really great things about it. I've seen, like, clips from the film, and it seems incredible. I've also not seen Mad Max Fury Road, which I also know is incredible. It's one of those on my, it's on my list. I promise I'll get to it. But this is a little concerning, right? If you really, really like these films, they may not make another one. And to be fair, the original Mad Max Fury Road did not also open super huge, but it opened bigger than Furiosa did, and that was like a decade ago. And even accounting for like inflation would only make it worse, right? In terms of like comparing those metrics. So it just seems like audiences just have not come to this film, which makes sense again because it's a prequel to a film that itself was a continuation of a not super popular franchise. So again, we'll see if it has legs, and I think that's something that is changing about the American box office, is that for like a decade, or really for like decades, plural, but really in the past decade, or even like 15 years, it's really been a focus of like, what's the opening weekend? If you have a giant drop, who gives a shit? As long as it makes a shit ton of money in the first weekend, who cares if there's a big drop? But what we're seeing now, especially post-COVID, films are not opening as big, but they're having, if it's good, if it's a decent film, it will have those legs. It will kind of, over time, kind of develop a following and a box office return the way that, films did for most of its history. Most films, because like the lack of home media, pre-VHS, pre-DVD, pre-streaming, films would be in theaters for way longer, right? Like their story, like I think it was something like the original Star Wars was in theaters for like a year. Like 12 months plus. And we're not talking about like specialty second run theaters, which were a thing, right? Because again, once they were out of the main theaters, then you would have specialty theaters that were like, hey, you saw this movie last year, you liked it, here it is at this theater for a cheaper price, right? So it was baked into the business model that films would make their money over time. It wasn't as important to have like this huge splash. And a lot of the most successful films of all time are like that. And in fact, going back to the Star Wars example, it had a decent opening weekend, but I don't think it was like one of the best opening weekends of all time. It just kept making, bananas box office every weekend, right? For months. So, I think that's what we're going to see here. And I think you're going to see that with a film here. I want you to try to guess what movie I'm thinking of. There's a movie in the box office here in the top 10 that I think is an example of how we're moving back to movies making their money more slowly over time. So if you think you know which one it is, if you look at the screen here, if you think you know which movie I'm talking about, drop it in the comments, and we'll see if anyone knows what I'm alluding to. Looking at number 2, though, it's If, and If is not necessarily one of... Well, actually, maybe this is not the one I was thinking of, but let's talk about If. So like Garfield, it jumped because Furiosa dropped so far. It jumped from 3rd to 2nd, now in its 3rd frame. This was only a 33% drop. So again, kind of like Garfield, it didn't have like a great reviews, but again, that's a pretty decent drop. And so far, its domestic total is 80 million, which is like fairly impressive, and 138 million worldwide, just off of a $110 million budget. So it still has a little bit of a way to go to double the budget, kind of break even. But for a film that I really have not seen anyone super excited about this. This could have some legs. This is not the film I was talking about, but this could have some legs. At number 4, we also have Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, bringing in a humble 8.8 million. It held its 4th place spot in its 4th frame. This was, again, also only a 34% drop. So again, this is a movie that I think will have legs and has shown to have some legs, but open pretty big. At least in terms of what the expectations were. So this brings its total to 140 million domestically and 337 million worldwide off of just a $160 million budget. And now I'm going to do this live. I'm pulling an audible. I'm going to go on Box Office Mojo and look at the domestic. Yeah, so looking at the domestic box office for the entire year so far, just domestically. Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes is the 4th highest grossing film. Again, at that 140-ish million for the year, only behind Kung Fu Panda 4 at number 3, Godzilla x Kong, The New Empire at number 2, and Doom Part 2 at number 1. So this has definitely been a pretty big success, which I don't think we were really expecting. So that's interesting that it's, and it's a good film. I was gonna review it, but then ended up getting really busy. I don't think it's as good as War for the Planet of the Apes, but I think it's on par with Dawn of the Planet of the Apes, right? Like the second one in that rebooted trilogy. And then we come to number 5. I see no one commented in the live stream, which is disappointing, because if you had commented The Fall Guy as the film that I think is benefiting from having, strong legs, it would be this one. So it's still in the top 5 in its 5th frame, so it's been in theaters for over a month at this point. And it only had a 30% drop, right? Only made about 4.2 million for the weekend, but again, slowly but surely, that's 4.2 million that they didn't have before, right? And this brings its domestic total to about 80 million, and its worldwide total to 158 million. Again, off of a 125, 150 million dollar budget. So again, still has a long way to go to double that budget, try to break even. But again, people were writing this off as like one of the biggest. Maybe I'm being hyperbolic about people being hyperbolic, but I feel like the narrative on this movie was like, this is a dud. It's going to streaming like two or 3 weeks after it was released. No one gives a shit about this. And I thought it was a good movie. It wasn't great, but I thought it was a lot of fun and a great kind of early summer season film to be in theaters. And I think word of mouth is kind of catching on of people being like, it's a fun time. It's like, it's not super long. It's an easy breezy viewing experience. Okay, let's move on to story number 1 here. Let me just grab a quick drink. Okay. And again, just a reminder, if you're watching and you have not already, please like this live stream. Please subscribe. Let all your friends know. Tell all your friends. Go out, shout out the window, if you must. Okay. Let's talk about story number 1. So, I want to talk about Jenny Nicholson's video, The Spectacular Failure of the Star Wars Hotel, because it sparked a lot of debate online. You might be saying, well, what's the news story here, Peter? And in some way, there isn't one, right? This is a video that was, released about 2 weeks ago. And you might be saying, Peter, are you just trying to ride the coattails of a popular video? To which I say, yes, I am. Because, again, I think it's really started a conversation that we're still kind of having. Like, even though it was only released, 2 weeks ago, it feels like it's, an essential part of, the canon, almost, of, YouTube videos in this, about topics like this, about theme parks. It feels like a new major addition to the YouTube theme park video canon, if you will. It feels like it's been now added to that. And it's not just me saying that, right? So, again, it's only been uploaded for just over 2 weeks. I think it was 17 days or something. It's already her third highest viewed video at about 6.9 million views, right? And it's incredible, not only the results that this video has had, but also considering it is over 4 hours long. It's about 245 minutes long. So it's not, you can't just say oh, well, it's a short video, people kind of click it, watch it, forget it, whatever. This is a meaty video. Now, I don't have access to Jenny Nicholson's analytics. I don't know what the average view duration is, but again, the YouTube algorithm wouldn't keep recommending it to people if people were just clicking on it for 30 seconds and then jumping away, right? But again, it sparked a lot of debate. So if you have not watched this video, I will kind of give you a brief, as brief as I can summarize a 4+ hour YouTube video. Kind of give you a brief context of kind of what's going on here in this situation and why I'm talking about it. So this all has to do with the quote-unquote Star Wars Hotel, which of course is its colloquial name. Really, in actuality, it was titled by Disney Star Wars Galactic Starcruiser. This was a, themed hotel at Walt Disney World in Florida near Hollywood Studios. That was open from March 2022 to September of 2023, which I actually went in September of 2023 to Disney World. So I'm curious if it was closed before or after that, because I didn't hear anyone talking about it. But if you notice, it was only for 18 months, right? Which is a little concerning, right? Because it was meant to be this revolutionary immersive experience. It was basically a big LARP experiment. If you don't know what LARP is, live action role play. So it's not just a themed hotel the way it's you go to Wilderness Lodge and it's themed like a frontier outpost, right? That's just the aesthetics. The idea behind Galactic Starcruiser was that by basically going, you are essentially role-playing as someone on an actual, basically a space cruise in the Star Wars universe. So all the employees are, in character. And, you are diegetically experiencing this event, this storyline, right? And again, it was meant to be this revolutionary, immersive experience. It was, this 2-day experience. And I think because of how cool Disney thought it was going to be, and due to how rabid Disney World fans are, and how popular the Star Wars brand is, they, I don't want to use the word overcharged, but it was very, very, very expensive. I think Jenny said in her video that the 2-night experience for 2 people, for her and herself and I think it was her sister, whoever it was with her, total, the entire experience, was about $6,000. That's insane, right? That is unbelievable for ultimately an experience that is worse than just going to the Disney World parks. Like I said, I went to Disney World in September of 2023 with my fiancée Viviana, who's watching. Hi. I think the entire experience for us, including food, was maybe $6,000. And that was a 7-day trip. And we stayed at pretty decent hotels. We didn't just get we basically ate at restaurants the entire week. And it was about the same as this 2-day experience that, from how she describes it, seems like it kind of sucked. Or rather, all the good parts were kind of overshadowed by all these mediocre all these elements that range from either being mediocre to like just being objectively bad. And because of that underwhelming experience, Jenny's kind of conclusion was like, this is not worth the money even if you have it, right? Like for what you're getting for the price, it's just not worth it. So a little context about Jenny Nicholson. So if you don't know who she is, she's pictured here, obviously, if you didn't put two and two together. She's been a YouTuber for like over a decade. At her start, she kind of, from what I understand, kind of posted miscellaneous videos infrequently. It wasn't like she had a strong brand identity or anything like that. But her channel really picked up speed in like 2016 and like that kind of particular period of pop culture, which I feel was like, maybe I'm just biased because that's like when I was like a freshman in college going to film school, and I feel like I was actually finally surrounded by people who like lived and breathed film the way I did. But 2016 felt like a very important moment in pop culture because like Star Wars had just been rebooted, Marvel's Phase 3 was starting, Batman v Superman was a huge dud, all this kind of stuff, right? So her channel really picked up speed in that year as she started to cover more popular topics, including but not limited to Star Wars, right? And from my understanding, she's really scaled back her YouTube presence to focus more on Patreon. Or she'll still do videos, but until this new one, her last upload to YouTube was like November of 2022, right? So that's like almost 18 months. I think maybe or maybe it was more than 18 months. I think at this point it's more than a year and a half, basically. So obviously it was a lot of like like everyone kind of freaking out, like new Jenny Nicholson YouTube video just dropped, and everyone like rushing to go watch it. So the ascent, I've kind of talked about it a little, but it seems like the video's kind of general thesis was basically the hotel failed on two levels. Conception and then execution, right? Her argument is that the concept was doomed from the start, that ultimately you have like conflicting design principles of Disney Imagineering, which is oftentimes either very passive, very environmental, very static in the sense that, when you go to a Disney park, you're not meant to do something in this exact order. You're meant to kind of let it wash over you. And then on the flip side, Imagineering is also really good at very controlled ride experiences that are timed, and they have like very specific kind of parameters. And this was kind of the worst of both worlds, right? It was trying to kind of combine those into something that you can never reconcile those two things. So those are ultimately two different design principles, right? Static, passive, environmental storytelling, and linear, timed, more or less, narrative experiences. And then but even then on top of it, it was also poor execution. So it wasn't even the best version of that flawed concept. She ended up doing, the reason why I decided, like I was debating doing this like for the past 2 weeks, and I was like, I don't know, maybe it's not really a story. But Rolling Stone interviewed Jenny, which I feel like is like a really big step up in her career. I don't know if she had been interviewed by a publication like that before. There's a couple excerpts here that kind of give more clarity on some of that thesis of hers, and also will tie into a point that I want to make down the road. So we have some quotes here from her in this interview. She said, quote, "As a YouTuber, I like to make content out of stuff, especially something like this, which it seemed like a lot of people would never get to see for themselves. So it seemed like a good opportunity to like document it and let people see what it was like. As with a lot of things I do, I thought it was going to be more of a neutral travelogue kind of thing, and then it turned into something totally different," end quote. So she talks about in this interview that, she was excited to use being a YouTuber as an excuse to splurge, right? Because again, it's like, that's like $6,000 is a lot of money. But she says here, quote, and she said this in the video too. She said, quote, "Because I knew it was going to be a video, in a sense, it felt lower pressure to know I would be getting the money back that I spent on it one way or the other," end quote. So, because she's able to monetize her videos, as I am not able to do because I do not have the watch hour or subscriber count for that. So please tell your friends to like and subscribe. She was basically like, whatever I put up, I'll probably with monetization make that money back. I'd be very curious to see how much money she's made now. I'm gonna do some actually calculations. So from what I've read, basically YouTuber on average, because this changes depending on a multitude of factors, but I think I read on average YouTubers who are able to monetize their content get about 1 to 2 pennies, closer to 2. I think it's like 1.8 cents for every ad that plays, right? So let's assume that 2 ads play at the beginning of the video, right? And theoretically there would be a lot more ad breaks during the video because it's such a long video. But let's just say, assuming that there's just 2 ad plays at the beginning, so that would be 0.018 times 2 times 6.9 million views. So she's probably made somewhere close to $250,000 off of this video. That is insane. And I should be so lucky, right? So her kind of argument was like, look, I will do this experience because like I can then make that money back. Kind of takes the pressure off of trying to see if I can financially make it work. She worked on the video for on and off for about 2 years, she says. And then once the hotel closed, though, in September of 2023, which I see Viviana commented that the hotel officially closed September 30th, as its last voyage was September 28th to the 30th. Thank you, Viviana, for doing some fact checking. Maybe we should have you be a fact checker, Viviana. That basically, once the hotel closed, Jenny said in terms of making the video, she kind of shifted from a video that was kind of recommendation based, like kind of like should you or should you not go. It then kind of became like this post-mortem, like what happened? Big question mark, right? She speaks to, she's not really sure why the video exploded, and she says here, quote, I think it might just be that Disney as a whole is so big right now that I feel like everyone has at least a cultural awareness of the brand. And there's a lot of discourse around Disney's rapid growth and how they own more and more things, and their perceived greed and the deep decline in quality of both movies, both the movies and the parks, end quote. And I think that's a really great point, Jenny, if you're watching this, which I doubt you are, that I think people just have an interest right now in Disney as a company because they've had a lot of missteps over the past like 5 years since the pandemic. And there is maybe a little bit of like schadenfreude of people kind of taking pleasure in Disney having not only a big failure, but a huge both high profile failure, but also probably a very expensive failure, right? And Jenny also notes that she feels like the Disney parks as a whole have declined in quality since the pandemic, saying, quote, the problems behind that, meaning the decline in quality, are kind of nuanced. A lot of it comes from how their CEOs have much shorter tenures now, so I think there's a lot more push towards short-term profits so the CEO can collect and then leave as opposed to focus on the longevity of the company and its reputation. So I think it comes down to more than just pure greed, or at least greed of the overall company, end quote. And that's a really good point, because again, yeah, like, if you only have CEOs who are in there for short periods of time, they aren't incentivized to think long-term of both the quality of the company and the reputation of the company. So, in a sense, this video kind of becomes a larger commentary on the Disney parks, Disney as a company, and if you want to go farther, which I will because I'm a very far lefty, if you will, a commentary on late-stage capitalism. This idea of companies really trying to put in the bare minimum to try and make as much money as possible. So the reaction to the video has been overwhelmingly positive from what I've seen, like seemingly universal praise. Like obviously social media is very algorithmic, so this is not necessarily, anecdotal evidence of what you saw on social media is not really a great way to judge something like this, but my Twitter feed was like dominated by people talking about this, people making memes about this. Like a big meme was about how when she was sat at dinner, like they designed the main restaurant dining area in such a way where some seats were like, there was a view of like live entertainment, but many seats were obstructed by like these giant pillars that it's unclear if they were structural or aesthetic, but in any case, it's like, you pay all this money, you expect to have unobstructed views of what's going on. So lots of memes about that. But Jenny claims that, people from Disney, or at least former Disney employees, have reached out to her, kind of echoing the concerns that she brought up and talked about how they were overworked and underpaid oftentimes, especially, like a lot of the workforce at the Star Wars Hotel were like part of the Disney College program, which if you don't know what that's all about, it's basically Disney's way to essentially get slave labor off of goodwill. They do get paid, but essentially it's an opportunity for college students to like spend a semester or like a summer working for Disney. As part of like their education process, and I think they still go like to classes and stuff, but it's basically a way to get like minimum wage, like Florida, and I'm sure they do it in the other parks as well, but I just know about it for Florida, like Florida minimum wage workers And I believe their housing is deducted from their pay, so it's even less than minimum wage. But because they're such strong Disney fans, they'll eat shit and like it, right? So, you know, there was a concern. And she makes a big point in the video that, you know, none of her issues were with, like, the regular cast members, which, if you don't know, that's just what Disney calls, like, their employees. It doesn't necessarily mean people who are, like, performing or, like, are actors. I think, if anything, those would be called, like, the character performers, or I don't know what the terminology would be. But she makes a point, like, all the cast members at the Star Wars Hotel went above and beyond to just hospitality, good energy, good vibes, helpful as they could be, right? So it seems like a lot of employees, you know, reached out and kind of echoed those concerns that she brought up. And she also says that former Imagineers reached out. So again, if you don't know what Imagineers are, essentially it's Disney corporate speak for, like, their creative engineering department that Walt Disney formed. The idea of, like, they're the ones, like, kind of coming up with, like, the ideas for the parks, or how to, like, implement ideas for the parks. And, you know, like I said, she got, you know, former Imagineers reached out to her. A lot of them seeming to be disillusioned, and many saying, you know, in response to her video, like, quote unquote, this is why I left the company, because of, like, attitudes like this, like, of, like, the corporate greed and laziness and things like that. And we have a quote from Jenny here saying, quote, I've kind of gotten the impression that there's a much faster turnover of Imagineers than there used to be. People think of the classic ones that were there when Walt Disney was working at the company, like Raleigh Crump and Tony Baxter, and all the ones that are like, kind of legendary to theme park fans now. That kind of career Imagineer doesn't really exist anymore. I heard a lot of them work for like 3 years on average, and then they either get laid off or they leave for better paying projects. And I think that probably makes a difference in quality too, end quote. And that's a great point. It's like we were saying before, if you don't have institutional longevity of people working at your organization, they're not going to be incentivized to think long term, because either they don't care enough because you don't pay them enough, or you're going to fire them, so they're like, why am I going to get invested in something that my friend got laid off last year for, right? So it seems like the reaction to the video has been like seemingly universal in terms of its praise, but there has been, I wouldn't call it backlash, but there have been people, you know, saying, disagreeing with her, right? There is that vocal minority of fans that disagree. I don't want to cast broad strokes, or paint broad strokes, so to speak, and if you're one of these fans that I'm about to describe, I don't mean you any offense. But I'm not going to hold back what I'm going to say. And Jenny kind of makes this point as well, and I also thought this as well. And then she said, I was like, okay, I'm glad we're on the same page. A lot of people defending things like this are blind fans, whether it be blind Disney fans or blind Star Wars fans, who just spent way too much money on this thing, and they don't want to admit that they wasted their money or their time, right? It's like the sunk cost fallacy. You know, you're more likely to double down on a decision like that because it's so costly, right? And she also calls on her video, like, the theme park influencer, and, like, I'm gonna call it, like, the theme park influencer industrial complex, right? Like, these YouTubers and Instagram users and social media, people on social media whose whole brand is being someone who goes to theme parks a lot, particularly Disney theme parks, and the allure, the business model, essentially, that people want to live vicariously through them. So it's important that these influencers stay on good terms with corporations like Disney, so they get invited to do experiences. So, like, a lot of theme park influencers got to do, you know, the Starcruiser experience early. And from what we understand, some of those experiences were not even full experiences. It was more like they would do like a little bit, and then someone would explain. So at this point, you would get to do this, blah, 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 blah. So then the influencers would just be like, then you get to do this, and isn't that incredible? So there's definitely like that. There's a financial incentive for those people, right? But again, then there are those cast members, those people who work at Disney who are, for lack of a better word, are just red-pilled, right? They are just, again, probably maybe Disney college program kids, maybe they're just lifelong employees. They are just so deep in the Disney sphere that, you know, it's almost reflexive to defend, you know, this $185 billion corporation from attacks, right? And, you know, Jenny said that people reached out to her and said things like, quote, you know, this was my favorite job I've ever done. This video is mean. Why are you besmirching this thing I loved working on so much, end quote. And it even escalated to a Screen Rant article by Molly Brazel, titled, I worked at the Galactic Starcruiser, and I can tell you what everyone's getting wrong about the quote-unquote Star Wars hotel. And the article basically hit all of the points that Jenny predicted. So near the end of the video, she's basically like, I'm sure people are going to say this, and this. And this article, almost as if it's parody, literally hit almost all of those points, especially the idea that you never call it the Star Wars Hotel. And that's why in that article title it's like the Star Wars Hotel, because Disney like wants things to be like very corporate and very like synergized and SEO friendly. So she's like, oftentimes when you watch these theme park influencers that, you know, are seemingly like it's organic feedback and like their own original thoughts, they're always saying like like when I got to do Star Wars Galactic Starcruiser, and never just the Star Wars Hotel, which is like what everyone would call it. So I'm just gonna read you, like this is like 4 or 5 of these, just the title of the subsections of the Screen Rant article. So, and again, it kind of hits all of Jenny's points. The Star Wars Galactic Starcruiser was the first of its kind. The Starcruiser was so much more than a hotel. The price was high, but so were a majority of the reviews, which I don't know if that's quite true. 1 year after its closure, only the crew is hurt by negative reviews. So really, it's your fault, Jenny Nicholson, not Disney's for this. And then 5, the Starcruiser still changed many people's lives. Did it? It changed people's lives. I mean, it changed your bank account if you went and you spent, $3,000, $4,000. And I mean, there's no evidence for this, but perhaps Disney kind of deployed their PR team to try to combat the negative perception. Because again, this is just a YouTuber, but also, again, this has gotten almost 7 million views, and I'm sure it will only continue to grow. This is definitely like quote unquote viral. So I would be shocked if someone high up at Disney is not at least aware of this video and the discourse that's happening. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of like what's going on. I know that was kind of long, but again, I think this topic is interesting because of the implications, right? So it speaks to the impact of YouTubers, right? It continues to show how popular and influential they and their content can be, to the point where, again, like quote unquote normal people were talking about this video, right? It was kind of like a mini cultural phenomenon, notably in a way that the Star Wars Hotel was not, right? This video is going to be more important and influential than its topic, which is very disappointing, I think, if you're Disney, right? It also speaks to the idea that people like long videos on YouTube, right? Jenny has a quote in her Rolling Stone interview saying, quote, I think a lot of people tend to be like, Gen Z doesn't have any attention span. And I think the long video essays are something you can point to as, well, they definitely can watch long stuff when they want to, end quote, right? And that just speaks to my point is like, people will pay attention if shit is good, right? I think what studios, I think, are just like, well, they don't have an attention span anymore. There's Gen Z, which they were saying about millennials, which they were saying about Gen X, which they're saying about boomers. It's just something you say about young people when they don't just accept the same slop from you anymore, right? And the final implication being, again, if my theory is true that someone high up at Disney is at least aware of this video, will it change the way Disney works, right? Will they... The biggest flaw seems to be here that this was kind of lazily and hastily put together. Not on every level, like I'm kind of in a vacuum, different elements a lot of attention and care was put into. I don't want to say that, but kind of in a macro sense, the whole thing kind of feels semi-lazy in terms of its conception and execution. So will they try harder and do better? According to her Rolling Stone interview, Jenny is not super hopeful, and we have this quote here from her saying, quote, unfortunately, I think the lesson Disney is going to take is not to do weird stuff, not to try anything that's outside the box, or do any of this kind of LARP gameplay stuff again. I think the problem was more with the execution of it. I think what they should take away from it is not experimenting with charging as much as they possibly can, not paywalling stuff that they consider extras like interactive characters, gameplay, anything beyond the bare minimum for the park guests. I hope the lesson taken away is, oh, we really asked too much of our fans there. We've really tried to take advantage of them in a way that wasn't wise and didn't pan out. And we ended up losing a lot of money in the long run. But I think the takeaway will just be, we're not going to build an immersive LARP hotel again, end quote. And I think she is spot on, that I think corporations, it's like the laws of entropy in the universe. Corporations will always take the wrong lessons from successes and failures. And I think she's 100% right that I don't think they are going to take any of the right lessons from this. They're just going to go, wow, we shouldn't try anything new because people didn't like it. It's like, no, people love new shit. In fact, every old shit that they like was once new shit. So you got to just make it work and actually like put that in. And Disney World itself was new shit. People love new shit. You just have to actually, like, have a vision and a passion for it. It can't just be, like, a box to check off on your corporate to-do list. Okay, that was a long one. Let me grab a drink. Okay, let's talk about story number 2. So, a new online platform is going to allow users to create AI-generated episodes of original series. So the platform is going to be called Showrunner, and supposedly the platform can write, voice, and animate episodes of shows that it carries, right? So these are not like, you won't be able to create episodes for pre-existing IP, but rather this platform will have like a stable of shows, and you as the user will be able to, put prompts in, like kind of like with ChatGPT, and conjure full episodes of the show. And not only will it just conjure it, but you'll be able to control dialogue and characters and shot types and things like that, which I think is really, really important, right? That's a really important innovation. Because the thing with a lot of these AI-generated image tools, whether they now start being motion video, but even just like pictures, is that really the only control you had was the prompt. And you could try to fine-tune the prompt as much as possible, but if you had if DALL-E, for example, OpenAI's image generator companion to ChatGPT, if you put prompts in and it came up with an image, and you wanted her shirt to be blue instead of green, you could put the prompt back in and just say, like, with a green shirt, but it might not create the same image, but just now with a green shirt, right? So I don't know how much control you'll have, like, with this, but this is really important to make it an actual practical alternative to, like, a regular production process, right? Being able to actually, like, generate something, but then be able to kind of manually change some of the details. We have a quote here from the CEO of this company, Fable Studio, that created this, Edward Sachi, saying, quote, "It'll understand the core conflict of your episode and develop it with another character or location, or you can say, I want this specifically to be the next scene," end quote. Like I said, you won't be able to create episodes for pre-existing IPs, and currently there's a waitlist open, for like this free testing version that's going to be lasting until I think like the end of this year. So like I said, this is created by Fable Studio, which is an Emmy-winning San Francisco startup. It won that Emmy in 2019 for innovation in interactive media. It released, I don't think it was just now, I think like a while back. It released an AI-generated episode, or episodes, potentially, I'm not sure, of South Park, the show South Park, to show off the technology, right? Again, you would not be able to do that on the actual platform, but I think just to show the capabilities of the technology. The Hollywood Reporter also notes that, many people point to this video, while not perfect, it was a very potent proof of concept. It was not a particularly good South Park episode, but it was a competent, sensible episode. Like, it made sense. It had lines and characters and jokes and had a beginning, middle, and end, right? And Sachi even goes on to say, quote, "AI can definitely make better episodes of The Simpsons today," end quote, which maybe is more of an indictment of The Simpsons, modern-day Simpsons, rather than a praise for Showrunner, this platform that Fable Studio has created. And furthermore, Sachi here, the CEO, has a much longer quote that's a little bit more broad here that really kind of, I think, shows what their vision is and like where they're coming from with all this. Quote, "The vision is to be the Netflix of AI. Maybe you finish all the episodes of a show you're watching and you click the button to make another episode. You can say what it should be about, or you can let the AI make it itself," end quote. So again, the idea will be that users will be encouraged to make their own episodes of shows. And it seems like the idea would then be that the best of which, the best kind of user-generated episodes, will be featured in the show's catalog, potentially becoming like canon, right? Which potentially creates some issues of like basically like having users create your content for you for free without providing any kind of compensation for it. Maybe if you get included in this catalog, you maybe get something. Maybe it'll be like ad revenue, kind of like YouTube. I'm not sure. But with this announcement, they unveiled 10 animated shows created using AI, created using this technology and this platform. And these shows were of various genres, right? So I think, the idea would be that, you could create an episode as part of one of these 10 shows. And again, it could be as passive as you want, or you could be a lot more involved with it. But for better or for worse, this is a sign of the future, right? Many tech companies have fantasized. Like, I've been hearing about this for like 2 years now at this point, ever since like AI really became super, super popular, many tech companies have fantasized about audiences being able to write their own stories in response to, the shows that they care about, characters that they care about, things like that. Personally, I am mixed about this. I think there are some obvious cons, but I think there are some pros here that people reflexively ignore or don't think of or try to underplay because of kind of their philosophical kind of position. Whereas, I'm obviously very opinionated, but I build my opinions off of information and thinking about all the different potentialities and trying to weigh the pros and cons. So I think one pro of this is, and this is something that these companies tout, and again, it would remain to be seen how much of this would actually end up being true, but technology like this could enable those without the money or the resources to create content, right? Again, especially if you can manipulate it. Because a big complaint people have had, or something people have said, is like, oh, I can't paint, so then I love being able to use DALL-E because it makes me feel like I'm a painter. And then people say, and I would agree with them here, you're not a painter. You just put in a prompt and it created an image. You're not really a painter. You didn't really create it. Like, you put in the prompt to then, it's like you gave it an assignment and then it fulfilled the assignment. But a technology like this, again, it fulfills the assignment. But if you're able to, again, have able to pull those levers, so to speak, to kind of have a little bit more artistic input, that could really change the game for people, and democratize content creation. Think about the random animation enthusiast in Idaho who does not have the training or access to resources to actually create any actual animation, but they have all these ideas. This technology or something like this could enable them to not only scratch that itch as a hobby, but actually maybe create something that can actually be shown to people. And again, there is some artistic voice present there, right? But again, I'm mixed because that's all really great. Will that happen? Who knows? What I do know will happen is that it will probably be exploited by companies who could pay workers to do this, but choose not to, as opposed to some random kid in Idaho who does not have access to that money or resources, right? Again, companies are always just looking to, spend less. So if spending less means having an AI do it versus an actual person, they will do that. And the one thing I am very against with all this is this idea of like, oh, you're watching your show and then it's over and you ran out of episodes. Like, you make your own show. Or you make your own episodes to continue the story. Yeah, as we've learned from like a few decades of fandom and people having very strong opinions about the trajectory their favorite franchises should go, audiences are not smart. Audiences are not good artists or storytellers, right? And oftentimes they don't know what they want, right? That's like what's always great about media and entertainment and content is getting someone else's vision for something and then you being surprised and you falling in love with this thing that you did not even know you wanted but you needed somewhere deep down, right? The CEO of the company, like I said, Sachi, said here, quote, "Our relationship to entertainment will be totally different in 5 years," end quote. So again, reinforcing this idea of a much, I think he called it like a two-way entertainment. I, as a creator myself, again, and I don't mean this in a pejorative sense, but I don't think audiences know what they want. And I could include myself when I am an audience member. I don't think that's something like, oh, this group of audience members don't know what they want because they particularly are dumb or they just don't know or they're not artistic. I'm just saying in general, that's like the whole idea of art is like it being basically art and artwork, whether it's a film or a painting or a sculpture or whatever it is essentially a medium of communication. It could be communicating a thought. It could be communicating a feeling. It could be communicating, anything. So if that process is just reflexive, what's the value there, right? I don't know. I'm not one of those people where it's like, oh, AI is ruining art, this, that, the other thing. I think it is just a different way to make art, and then we can argue about the merits of that, but I don't think you could say it's not art. Because when you put something into DALL-E, yes, you do not have the same control as if you were a painter starting with a blank canvas, but you as the user type text into the prompt, and then the AI model that was created by human beings creates the image. So there are multiple humans at different stages of the process providing their input into the artistic process. Again, you can argue about the merits of that, but I don't think you can argue that the final result is somehow not art. You can say it's bad art, but I think by my definition, it is human created or human a human authored product in some way. And again, nevertheless, this is just incredible technology. Whether it's good or bad, it's incredible that something like this could even exist. And maybe this won't really affect actual mainstream content production, but perhaps it could make for, like an independent creator community, like on this platform, right? That's very insular, but that doesn't make it necessarily bad or good, whatever it might be. It's kind of like with YouTube, where it's not like YouTube has changed theatrical films. It is just a different type of entertainment people consume, right? So I think maybe it could create a new kind of community as opposed to replacing existing communities or processes. And this just kind of speaks to overall kind of my opinions with artificial intelligence. I'm of the mind that, obviously there's specific exceptions and cases, and you should look at everything kind of case by case. But on the whole, my feeling is that AI won't take your job. Someone who knows how to leverage the power of artificial intelligence, that person's going to take your job. Kind of like 20, 25 years ago, Google didn't take your job. Someone who knew how to leverage Google took your job, right? There will still be a market for more original content, because ultimately you need original content, because that's what these AI models are using as reference. So eventually, if nothing new gets created, it'll just become self-referential. There will always be a market for original content. The same way there is still a market for, fresh baked cookies, even though Chips Ahoy exists, right? There is still a market for artisanally made furniture, even though IKEA exists, right? And frankly, the argument of this is going to destroy jobs, in the actual context of society, I agree that that's a problem, because ultimately what's going to happen to those people who lose their jobs, they're going to be just shit out of luck, because we live in a amoral capitalistic society. Sorry, not sorry. So they're going to essentially just be shit out of luck. In a perfect world, as we develop more automation for physical and digital processes, those companies need less workers, they have higher profit margins, therefore then we should be taxing them at higher rates, and then therefore we can have more basic social programs. So if you lose your job, or you become unemployed or underemployed, you're not going to in danger of dying because you can't pay for food or rent or things like that. So in that perfect, and I understand that's a utopian ideal, but that seems to make a lot of sense considering where we're going in terms of automation. So ultimately, if the only thing keeping your job around is technology not advancing, then there's a fundamental flaw in that schema, if you will, right? Again, it's like the idea of we shouldn't invent cars. But maybe we shouldn't have, but not for the reason I'm about to say. We shouldn't invent cars because then all the guys driving the horse and buggies, they'll be out of a job. That's not a reason to not build cars or invent cars, right? So that's kind of where I stand. And again, maybe the end result of all of this isn't that AI is going to create content wholesale, this beginning, middle, and just here's this product, but rather parts of the process can be streamlined and then tweaked, which could save money for an independent production. Not because they're greedy, but because they literally have no money, right? So again, I am conflicted about it, but ultimately it's definitely an exciting space that I'm going to keep watching. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. I know these stories have been kind of long. I know we're already coming up to 7, but I think this is a very interesting week of stories, and we still have 3 more to go. Okay, so a new report from Bloomberg indicates that Pixar will try to lean on existing franchises more rather than focusing on original stories, right? We have a quote here from Thomas Buckley, who is the author of this Bloomberg report, of this article, saying, quote, every hit of yesteryear is being considered for a reboot, with Finding Nemo and The Incredibles regarded as particularly strong candidates for new titles, end quote. And notice they're not more sequels, but reboots, as in stories that will not be canon to the original storyline, taking the concept and completely kind of flipping it on its head. So what's the context for this? So, Pixar, I don't need to explain what Pixar is, but I will speak to a little bit about the impact of Pixar, right? Starting with its, originally started as a digital 3D animation subsector of Lucasfilm and ILM, got kind of spun off, kind of focused on shorts and stuff, and eventually made its first feature film with Toy Story in 1995. Essentially revolutionized theatrical animation in general, and essentially created a sub-industry of 3D animation that essentially just became the animation industry. That the dynamic is flipped, that really now 2D animation is more niche. And obviously, I was very fortunate to basically grow up in like the Pixar, golden age, if you will. Like, I was born in 1997, so I was there for, that early, basically the stretch of the 2000s, Monsters Inc. and Incredibles and Ratatouille, Toy Story 3. Like when Toy Story 3 came out, I was like 13, right? So it was like kind of like this big stretch. And the 2010s, though, the company started to struggle critically. With their films, right? So again, for context, it was an independent studio. Disney would distribute their films, but it was not owned by Disney. And then there was a potential that, that they would no longer distribute their films. There was big issues between Pixar and Michael Eisner, Disney villain of the era. But then once Bob Iger becomes CEO, one of his first kind of acts is he acquires Pixar, and that was like 2006. Some would argue that's where things maybe started to go downhill, right? So once you start having films that started development under the Disney umbrella, really in the 2010s, is, they still made good money, but it was clear that the golden age was behind them, right? And also didn't help that John Lasseter, the Walt Disney of Pixar, so to speak, left the company in like 2017 or 2018 due to the Me Too movement, right? He had been accused of not sexual assault or anything, but just very inappropriate, behavior with female workers and colleagues and subordinates, sometimes veering into like just full-on sexual harassment. But I'm not saying therefore he should have stayed because he was the glue holding all together, but that's ultimately a reality of the situation that, the company was already kind of struggling, creatively, and that really did not help, right? And since the dawn of the pandemic, the company has struggled not only critically but commercially. Critically, it's kind of mixed, right? So, and by mixed, I mean, well, I'll get to it. So the reviews seem to be pretty decent. So if you look at Pixar's films going from 2020 onward, and onward is a pun, because the first one would be Onward, right? That has an 89% in Rotten Tomatoes, but it opened like right before the pandemic. So that kind of became DOA in terms of box office. Then their next movie, Soul, was very well received, though I thought it was only kind of like okay. Has 95% in Rotten Tomatoes, but it went straight to Disney+. Their next film, Luca, also was pretty well loved at 91%, went straight to Disney+. Then Turning Red got a 95% in Rotten Tomatoes, went straight to Disney+. So you're seeing a trend here. Their first theatrical release since Onward, Lightyear in 2022, only got about 74% on Rotten Tomatoes, and it was a big commercial flop. It wasn't a huge bomb, but like I think it was made for like $240 million, like something crazy, and basically made that in its box office worldwide. So definitely not ideal, worse than not ideal. And then their next film and their latest film until Inside Out 2 comes out this month, I think. It's like only a couple weeks from now. Their last film, Elemental, also got, I think, like a 73% on Rotten Tomatoes. And also with all this, I also just remembered, like, that's what I have here on the left side of the screen, this chart. Basically, this is from the Bloomberg article, kind of charts all of Pixar's films and kind of comparing the box office results to, like, the Rotten Tomatoes score. I know, like, the first couple films are kind of blocked off by that giant number 3, but still, those are not really super relevant to this discussion. But Elemental, I think, got, like, a 73% on Rotten Tomatoes. despite kind of having legs and kind of ending up becoming like the 17th highest grossing film domestically in 2023, it had one of the worst openings in Pixar history, right? Especially, compared to previous films from the studio. And again, like I said, it's very weird to try to be like, put a feather in its cap. It was the 17th highest grossing film domestically in 2023, right? But it wasn't, okay, so you could say it was in the top 20, right? But if you compare that to 2019, where Pixar's release was Toy Story 4, that came in at number 3 for the year domestically and made over like $1 billion, I think, worldwide. So, you kind of see the 3 or 4 year the 4 or 5 year difference in the studio's success at the box office. We have a quote here from Jim Morris, who's Pixar's president, saying, quote, in reference to Elemental not doing so well, saying, quote, "We were all kind of gut punched and it was tough on morale. I thought it was a good film with a Pixar feel, so when it didn't work, that was like, whoa. I was thinking, do people just not want to see this kind of film we make anymore? Is that done?" End quote. I would argue that while Elemental was like decent, it was pretty formulaic and generic, and I feel like Pixar has really kind of developed a formula that it kind of is, even its best films of like the past 10 years or so, like maybe stick to a little bit too closely. So it's like, yeah, maybe you should make different kinds of films. But in any case, Bloomberg notes that in addition to all this, when it, the creative issues here, in terms of, again, that box office of Lightyear and then Elemental, Bloomberg notes that the Disney Plus era has it's trained audiences to expect theatrical quality animated films from Disney, but most importantly Pixar. It's trained audiences to expect films of that quality on streaming, either immediately or not too long after it releases in theaters, right? This is not the same as the Marvel Studios issue where they were just oversaturated both in theaters and on Disney Plus. But essentially, due to the pandemic, Disney, again, like those 3 films, Soul, Luca, and Turning Red, they recently got a domestic release in theaters. Basically because Disney was like, shit, maybe streaming isn't profitable, and we should put these movies in theaters to make actual dollars. So, it's not necessarily the same situation like oversaturation like Marvel had, but there's definitely an issue of Disney, and they're not alone in this, right? Every studio, basically, except Sony, did this. Really going all in on streaming, put all the chips on Red, and clearly that has not worked out for them. And of course, this is all in the same context as Bob Iger returning to Disney as CEO after he left in early 2020. And he's vocalized his main concern is improving, the output of films from across all the different studios. Of course, Pixar would be one of them. So Pixar is really trying to get lean and mean. So it recently laid off about 175 employees. So that was like 14% of their workforce. From my understanding, a lot of that workforce was brought on to work on streaming exclusive content. And of course, now they're really trying to focus on the theatrical films rather than that streaming output. And Bloomberg also notes that, Inside Out 2, which I think comes out in like a week and a half, like not this Friday, but the next Friday on June 14th, I think. Inside Out 2 is really going to be the real test of Pixar president Morris. Like I said, it's really going to be a test of his strategy, right? Morris said here, quote, "With a sequel, if you put something out there that doesn't have the goods, then you will be punished for it. Having had the doldrums we did, it will certainly be a good test with Inside Out 2 for us to see, does this stuff still work or does it not?" End quote. Apparently, in addition to, really leaning on franchise IP for the film, apparently they're also going to be releasing an Inside Out television series at some point. I couldn't get clarity on if that would be a television series, like television, or on Disney Plus. The show would be called Dream Productions. It would be about Riley's dreams and all this stuff. Really trying to milk this idea, which I'm kind of like a Inside Out hater. I don't hate the film, but I kind of find it okay. But it makes me dislike it more because everyone talks about how great it is. So I thought the original film was milking the cow dry. I feel like there wasn't really a lot there to make a satisfying full film. So the fact that they're making a sequel and potentially a show, I feel like it's I think they will get punished, like Morris said. But again, all of this brings up the classic issue with Hollywood studios relying on recognizable franchises and IP. Are we just going to pretend that Inside Out, are we just going to ignore the fact that Inside Out was itself an original idea? That it was not a sequel or a reboot or a spin-off of something? Granted, it was not a very original idea lowercase o, right? Like in the sense, like, I mean, like, people have done films and stories and clips of like a group of people in your head that are kind of like represent all the different parts of you, right? But it was not based on anything, right? And it did really well. So, like, in order to have franchises that you can milk, you need to create franchises, right? And again, audiences, I think, are becoming more and more aware of that. They're becoming a lot more savvy, right? So we have a quote here from Pixar's Senior Vice President of Development, Lindsay Collins. She describes kind of having a conversation with her son, and she said, quote, "The other day I was like, what if I told you we were making an Incredibles 3? And he was like, money grab. And I was like, fuck." Which I'm surprised that she said. She continues saying, quote, "Sequels are a double-edged sword because the audience can be brutal and so quick to judge unless they're worthy," end quote. And again, that's the thing. I'm not against sequels, right? Like, I think Toy Story 2 is a far superior film to Toy Story 1. But you have to justify that film's not only existence, but then execution, right? It has to both be good in concept and practice. And a lot of these films that Disney has been pumping out that, again, are spin-offs or reboots or remakes or whatever they are, just don't have the goods, right? Overall, I find this whole kind of approach of, like, really focusing on, like, hey, these films that were more personal and idiosyncratic didn't do as well, so maybe we need to just do, Toy Story 5, which I think is happening, which, the fact, like, Toy Story 2 was the best one. They could have just ended it at Toy Story 2. I'm sorry. Let me get back to brass tacks here. So again, it's not really an issue of whether a film is original or new, or if it's original or a continuation of a franchise. A lot of these films were just underwhelming, right? Rotten Tomatoes scores are one thing, but audiences aren't the same as critics, right? So I imagine if you go and look at some of the user scores for these films, like especially like on places like Letterboxd, those films that have like fairly high Rotten Tomatoes scores are not going to have the same kind of love, right? They just don't strike a chord in the same way. And again, are we just going to ignore that original films, original stories is how Pixar made a name for itself, right? Like Toy Story, Monsters, Inc., The Incredibles, Ratatouille. These are all not only did well financially, are some of the best films in the media, in animation, and some of my favorite films of all time. So you don't get franchises out of those. You don't get franchises out of nothing. You have to take those chances in order to actually even have the option to turn something into a franchise, right? And again, the newer films have mostly been interesting innovations, even if I don't necessarily love them all. But Turning Red is one of my favorite films of that year, and it's one of their I think it's one of Pixar's best films in years. So ultimately, I think that Pixar and Disney are taking the wrong lessons from the failure of something like Lightyear, right? It seems to think like they think like, oh, it wasn't IP. It wasn't the fact that this was a continuation of a franchise that no one wanted to see a continuation of or a spinoff from, but the issue was that it was too different from the IP, which I think is wrong, right? I think the issue was that no one gave a shit because no one gives a shit about a Buzz Lightyear diegetic spinoff, especially if it's not very good. And we have a great quote here from Mary Kate Carr in an article she wrote for AV Club, which, sidebar, not to throw shade at AV Club, but I feel like it's really gone downhill, and I think other people have said that. But this is like the first interesting thing I've read from AV Club in like months. So I really wanted to give a shout out here. And in her article, she said, quote, "One might look at those examples, like Lightyear, for example, and extrapolate that interconnected stories are a bigger risk. Sequels and spin-offs come with pressure to live up to the original, while originals just need some time and nurturing to get off the ground. When you look at something like Elemental, which didn't open big, but needed that time to kind of develop and grow, right? Ultimately, like we said, the company has just had a major brain drain, right? There's like this original kind of core group of people at Pixar at its start. You had like John Lasseter, Pete Docter, Andrew Stanton, Joe Ramp, Brad Bird to an extent. Really the only one left is Pete Docter, right? He's the only like of that original visionary group that's still left, right? And again, I think maybe it's helped in terms of the bottom line, but their films were doing so well before that. I think the Disney buyout may have been for the worst, or worse, right? I think maybe it would have been better if they could have stayed independent, but again, still had that distribution deal with Disney. Okay, let me grab a quick drink here. Okay. This is the third story tonight that is about Disney. It just shows to show how monopolistic they are, and their tentacles are everywhere. Okay, let's talk about story number 4. So Kathleen Kennedy, who's the president of Lucasfilm, she became president when George Lucas sold the company to Disney in 2012. She has, she was doing an interview with New York Times about the upcoming Disney Plus Star Wars show, The Acolyte, which takes place, like hundreds of years before the prequel trilogy. So it's disconnected basically from any characters that we know or are familiar with. In this interview, though, Kathleen Kennedy identified Star Wars' quote-unquote male-dominated fan base as the reason women in front of and behind the camera struggle in the franchise, right? We have a big quote from her here that I think is really revealing, saying, quote, operating within these giant franchises now with social media and the level of expectation, it's terrifying. I think a lot of the women who step into Star Wars struggle with this a bit more. Because of the fan base being so male-dominated, they sometimes get attacked in ways that can be quite personal. My belief is that storytelling does not need to be representative of all people. My belief is that storytelling does need to be representative of all people. That's an easy decision for me, end quote. So this has been a big problem. Basically for a decade, ever since we really got our first look at the sequel trilogy with Star Wars Episode 7, The Force Awakens, right? And Kathleen Kennedy is quite possibly one of the most hated people in entertainment, but only by fans. And by fans, I mean like very, very rabid, toxic, mean is the word. And I don't care about, these people make millions of dollars. I'm not saying you can't criticize these people, but people like Kathleen Kennedy have been the target of, again, like what she talked about, like this male-dominated fan base that, especially Kathleen Kennedy, because they believe that she's to blame for every single thing that's gone wrong with Star Wars since it was bought by Disney. And some of it's true. And some of the complaints are valid and constructive. But then a lot of them are just like, they made Star Wars woke. Which, I'm not sure why they think that. Is it just because they're seeing women and people of color in Star Wars? They weren't before, and they're like, that's woke. Because the original Star Wars was woke, in the sense George Lucas was a very, very far left political person. And he has spoken, like, this is not like theory, this is not like kind of projecting onto Star Wars. He has talked about, the original Star Wars was very much inspired by the era in which he grew up, like the late 60s and early 70s with Nixon and the Vietnam War. And to him, he saw America as the evil empire, and he saw the rebels as being like the Viet Cong fighting for their freedom against this, huge force, right? No pun intended. So you could say, going back to the original Star Wars, it was woke. So I think when people say woke, they just mean diverse, and when they say diverse, they mean people that I'm not used to seeing are now in things, and that makes me angry. Sorry, I'm not trying to be reductive. If you're watching this and you're one of those people, I mean, feel free to leave a comment and explain your point of view, but, if it just devolves into just you being like, oh, it's just like woke, trash, blah, 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 I mean, like, that's not really good reasons. Like, it also just sound really dumb, because oftentimes they're written with a bunch of spelling errors and punctuation errors, and anyway, I'm not trying to do an ad hominem thing. So, there are some examples of this over the past decade, right? So you have cases of, the Independent notes, actresses like Daisy Ridley, who played Rey, obviously, like the main character of the sequel trilogy, along with Kelly Marie Tran, who had a fairly sizable role in The Last Jedi that got demoted for Episode 9. They both left social media due to online abuse that they faced from trolls, right? And Tran even had a quote in 2018 saying, quote, they're being the trolls. Their words seem to confirm what growing up as a woman and a person of color already taught me, that I belonged in margins and spaces, valid only as a minor character in their lives and stories, end quote. And in addition to that, not just in the movies, but Moses Ingram, who played like one of the main villains on the Obi-Wan show, as a black woman, also faced abuse while in her role on that show. And again, I think that's really important. So yeah, so like Daisy Ridley is just like a typical brunette white woman, which Star Wars, they're fine with that until they're not, but that's pretty standard for Star Wars. But Kelly Marie Tran, of course, is Asian, and Moses Ingram is black. So I would also loop into this, and at this point Kathleen Kennedy did not bring this up, maybe because she's a white woman and there's such a thing as white feminism. But this is also a race issue as well, that the same things that she's talking about, you could just swap out women with people of color, and the same things persist, right? So like Kelly Marie Tran and Moses Ingram we mentioned. You also see with John Boyega, who is a man, but a black man. And I remember there was a huge backlash revealing him in the original Force Awakens trailer. Like, he's the first person that we see in the sequel trilogy in terms of the trailer. That was our very first look at any character in this movie, in that movie. And people were like, I can't believe there's a black stormtrooper, to which people rightly pointed out, well, we never saw anyone under the stormtrooper helmet, so for all we know, a bunch of them were black, one. But two, it seems like you're more concerned with a black man being like one of the main characters. You're fine with him being Samuel L. Jackson being Mace Windu because he's Samuel L. Jackson, and he's like cool and mysterious and also not the main character. And, he publicly, once the sequel trilogy was all wrapped and he kind of, was freed from corporate PR jail, like he was able to actually say shit because like he was no longer part of this franchise anymore, he publicly spoke out against Disney, and Hollywood in general, and pleading with studios to support its stars of color, against online vitriol. And he said here, quote, when one of your actors, especially an actor that's so prominent in the story, is announced as part of the as part of your franchise, and then it has a big racial backlash and receives abuse online, it is important for the studios to definitely lend their voice, lend their support to that, and to have a sense of solidarity, not just in the public eye, but on the ground, on set, end quote. And John Boyega, and I think a lot of people point this out, that, the marketing kind of made it seem like he was the main character, and there was kind of like this bait and switch in the story, which is interesting on certain levels, but also you bait and switched, like, hey, this black man, this black character is going to be like the main character of a Star Wars film. And then you were like, psych, no, he's not. So I think John Boyega is really touching on something that they most people agree, no matter how you feel about any individual film in the sequel trilogy, most people agree that John Boyega's character was wasted. But again, so people, again, this is all coming out, again, like, because that show called The Acolyte, it's going to be premiering on Disney Plus. Some fans are calling the show by the derisive name The Wokalite, which isn't even clever. I'm sorry. So Leslie, or Leslie, I think Leslie, yeah, Leslie Headland is like the showrunner for the show, and she's gonna be the first female showrunner, right, for a Star Wars series. Her claim to fame, she directed the Jason Sudeikis, Alison Brie romantic comedy drama Sleeping with Other People, which I saw and quite liked. She also co-created the Netflix series Russian Doll, which I know a lot of people like. And she has a quote. She was also being interviewed for the New York Times in the same interview that Kathleen Kennedy made these remarks. She said, quote, I stand by my empathy for Star Wars fans, but I want to be clear. Anyone who engages in bigotry, racism, or hate speech, I don't consider a fan, end quote. And I kind of agree. Again, it's like, well, I mean, I guess I would still consider you a fan. I would consider you a toxic fan and an asshole. The New York Times also notes, that there was comments on the trailer for this series. One of the comments was, "Why are there so many women girls? Why are there so many women, girls, and minority characters increasingly dominating the ranks of Jedi?" End quote. And this seems to ignore, that there's been plenty of women and people of color in Star Wars as Jedis. Not to mention fucking aliens. Like, it's okay you have someone with like 3 arms and like 1 giant eyeball, but you can't have like a black human man. That seems ridiculous to me. So maybe there's a way, maybe Disney, maybe like when they did this, because notably Star Wars wasn't very diverse. It was definitely like it had 1 black character in the originals. Maybe you could incorporate real world prejudice into the Star Wars universe diegetically. Like maybe there could be in-universe racism that, and that's why most prominent Jedi have just been like white men. Like you could do something that could make it work. But ultimately, the problem with Kathleen Kennedy's arguments is that everything she's saying is true. But part of me also wants to be like, yeah, and you're the one who left them out to die. You're the one who left them out to get abused in this way online. And ultimately, this is how I kind of feel about representation in Hollywood in general. That, stronger choices need to be made. They are making these decisions to make things diverse for monetary reasons, and not because they actually give a shit. And this is unfortunately where, like me and then someone like one of these toxic fans would both agree about that statement. My argument is, but they should care. Whereas the toxic fans' argument is they don't care, so they should stop doing it because I don't like it and they don't even care about it in the first place. I think representation is really important, right? And a lot of, like all of Disney, like Disney has seen this over the past decade or so, and Hollywood has kind of experienced this. A lot of the diversity that we're seeing, like those strides being made, is most of the time has been very cosmetic and superficial. And again, it really just feels cynical and pandery, and it's just a way to just kind of make more money. Be like, wow, look how diverse this is, right? Again, like that bait and switch with Finn being kind of portrayed in the trailers as like he's gonna be the main character of The Force Awakens, only to kind of get swapped out for Rey by the end. So ultimately, I kind of feel like, how can we make stories that actually reflect marginalized communities rather than just taking a franchise with a white character and then just swapping it for women or people of color? Because you're just gonna basically subject those actors to a bunch of abuse, because people, whether they should or shouldn't, are going to feel very strongly about you, quote unquote, changing their favorite thing or ruining their childhood or something dumb, right? But then also, it feels like they're just getting the scraps, right? And I've always said this about, things like the Ghostbusters reboot in 2016, which I know is very similar to this, where a lot of people made very bad faith arguments of like, they're trying to make Ghostbusters woke, they're turning into this diverse liberal bullshit, and they're ruining my childhood, blah, blah, blah. I don't care about any of that stuff. My concern with that was, well, the movie didn't seem to be very good to begin with in a vacuum, but then also it's like, so we can't create new and exciting franchises for women. We have to give them the scraps of essentially dead franchises. And I don't think that's fair, right? I don't think we should cater to bigotry and just keep these white male franchises the way they are, but also think about, you have to really be earnest in why you're diversifying it. If it's just for money or optics, I think that's the wrong move. And while the Star Wars fan base may not be like by the numbers male dominated, they are the most vocal group, right? And because white men have been most commonly associated with the fandom, because white men have been most commonly associated with like nerd culture and nerdy things. Because for a lot of history, they were the only people, like, at least that we could see, right? Loving this shit, right? So I don't know. I just find I agree with everything Kathleen Kennedy is saying, but it's just disappointing to see. It's like, okay, but it's like you're the one complaining about it, but you're the one who could do something. You're like, you are like, in fact, like the only person who could do something about it. So you should go do that. Okay, let me grab one quick drink before doing story number 5. Okay, let's talk about story number 5. The Paramount acquisition, merger, sale, whatever you want to call it, the saga is not over. This is probably like my 6th or 7th video on the channel about this story, but it may very well be coming to an end. I am happy to report. So, Skydance Media, led by David Ellison, who's pictured here, has revised the terms yet again of its offer to acquire Paramount Global. So the terms of the deal, we don't have like the exact numbers for everything. There would be an increased cash offer, which would include a $15 a share cash out option for Class B shareholders. So the way it works is there are 2 types of shares you can buy for Paramount. Class A would give you voting rights, and Class B would not give you voting rights. Currently, Class B shares are trading at just below $13 a share. So this would be like a $2 premium essentially on every. So if you have like a shit ton of shares, that could be a lot of money. But from what I understand, I'm not a stock market expert, right? But it seems like only 50% of those shares would be subject to that. So I'm not sure exactly how that would work out. But in any case, they've sweetened the deal on the premium that smaller shareholders would get. And they also restructured the deal, like I was saying, to benefit regular shareholders more, right? This is really the most important part of this revised deal, considering many prominent Class B shareholders like investment firms and hedge funds have threatened to sue, essentially because the original plan was going to benefit Sherry Redstone, the owner of National Amusements, which has the controlling interest of Paramount. The original deal was really going to benefit her at the expense of those Class B shareholders. So they were basically going to sue, being like, you are not fulfilling your fiduciary responsibility. We are going to come for your ass, right? But in this new deal, Redstone, again, would get less cash, right, on hand. And IndieWire notes that this this whole thing would cost Skydance about $8 billion, right? So it's basically just a improved version of the original offer. So the idea here is that Skydance would acquire National Amusements first, which again is the company that Sherry Redstone owns, the company that has the controlling interest in Paramount. Then Skydance would merge with Paramount Global, right? And the wrap notes that this combined company would be worth about $5 billion. And this is not the first time that Skydance has revised the offer. So Skydance, eventually revised the offer to assuage those shareholder concerns, which include a $3 billion cash infusion. And this was supposedly the final offer until this one that I'm talking about today. So clearly Skydance blinked, playing chicken. And I think this speaks to they must really want Paramount. They maybe need Paramount more than Paramount needs them, if that's somehow even possible. And the deal would still need to be approved by Paramount's independent special committee, which at the time of me doing these notes originally today, it had not been, but put a pin in that, spoiler alert. The Wrap reports that the committee, has agreed to recommend that revised offer, right? So really now Yahoo Finance notes, I was reading an article from them, that really now it's in Sherry Redstone's hands, right? Because, of course, this is not the only offer on the table. There's, of course, the Sony Apollo deal with Sony and Apollo Global Management, the private equity firm, kind of like a joint kind of venture to acquire Paramount. Of course, one of my very first stories I ever did on the channel was about Byron Allen, the media mogul, who made an offer earlier this year. At one point, Warner Brothers and David Zaslav were considering like a potential merger. That didn't really go anywhere. But this revised offer gives Skydance deal new life. I think the last video I did about this, that the Skydance deal seemed to be fizzling out completely in favor of either the Sony Apollo deal or just Paramount not selling it to anyone and just trying to improve it from within, which always seems skeptical to me, because this whole merger acquisition process is a last resort. So it's like, well, what are you going to do differently that you weren't doing for the past 5 years or whatever, right? And so these revised terms kind of breathe some new life into this deal, right? It's always been Sherry Redstone's preferred option. It would keep the media empire together that her father, Sumner Redstone, built over like decades. That includes CBS and MTV and Nickelodeon and all these different assets. And if they can, cross the finish line here, if they can get those Class B shareholders on board, this could very well be the final outcome. That this could be the last time I'm talking about this until it actually becomes a done deal. Which, of course, even if everyone agreed, it would still face regulatory scrutiny from the government. But, so I wrote these notes earlier today, or maybe around 3 o'clock. And then I was kind of looking through some of my notes. And literally just today, Paramount Global and David Ellison Skydance Media, this is like a direct quote from the Wrap. Paramount Global and David Ellison Skydance Media have agreed to deal terms on a potential merger, which currently awaits approval from controlling shareholder Sherry Redstone, an individual with the matter told the Wrap on Monday. End quote. The LA Times notes that the formal approval should come soon. That again, I would be shocked if Sherry Redstone decides to go with any other option. A big issue here, again, if they do this, is that legal concern. So the New York Times reports that Paramount, part of this deal, which has not been agreed to yet by Skydance, but Paramount wants Skydance to pay for any potential lawsuits, right? Whether it be from the government or from Class B shareholders. And Deadline also notes that, Wall Street seems cautiously optimistic about the deal. It didn't explode or anything, but the stock price did go up slightly on the news of this deal. So, I think everyone is kind of tired of this back and forth. Will they, won't they? And I think Wall Street and Paramount just want to get this thing done. So it's going to be, I really hope this thing gets done. I've enjoyed talking about it, but ultimately I feel like I'm circling the drain here. I don't know what more I can say about this, but I don't know. Only time will tell. Hopefully soon. Okay, before wrapping up, let's just take a quick look at the upcoming releases for this upcoming week, this upcoming weekend. How many times can I say upcoming? What about downcoming? We never say downcoming in the reverse. You say you're coming down. Anyway. So opening this weekend is going to be the 4th Bad Boys film, Bad Boys Ride or Die, which I'm really pissed about because the 3rd one was called Bad Boys for Life. But if they were smart, they would have named the last one Bad Boys Ride or Die. And then the 4th one would be Bad Boys for, like the number 4, Life. They should hire me. I don't know why they didn't. I'm projecting this is going to make about 34 to 41 million. Everyone is projecting it way higher. which I just don't see happening. I don't think Bad Boys, like I saw projections anywhere up to 50 to 70 million. I do not think Bad Boys is that level of franchise to do that. Especially considering the weak summer box office. So far this year, I'm pretty pessimistic. I'm pretty bearish on this film, being like a huge summer splash or whatever. Maybe I could be wrong. Again, it's like a certain kind of film, like an action kind of, but also kind of funny, and people love Will Smith, though maybe not as much anymore since the Oscar slap. But I am boldly proclaiming it's only going to make 34 to 41. So when it makes 63 next weekend, I will, I'll have to, come and with my tail between my legs. And then the other big movie opening is going to be The Watchers. This is the directorial debut for M. Night Shyamalan's daughter, who actually went to NYU with me. I never met her, but she was, I think, a sophomore when I was a senior, Shauna. She actually dated a good friend of mine, but I don't think they're together anymore. But I remember him talking about, like, he had met M. Night a couple times, and it was kind of, like, awkward, because it's like you want to, like, talk to M. Night Shyamalan, but, like, you have to remember, like, he's not M. Night Shyamalan, he's your girlfriend's dad. Brittany, if you're watching, you're probably not. I don't know why. I haven't talked to you in years. But anyway, so this is going to be her directorial debut, and I'm projecting it's going to make anywhere from 13 to 16 million. Getting a kind of smaller film. I think it's going to help that it has that M. Night Shyamalan, relationship, because he is producing. I believe it's based off a story, like it's story by M. Night Shyamalan. But I'm curious to see how it actually ends up doing at the box office. But, I could see it being a dud, or it could be like a little sleeper hit, because people love a good little horror thriller in the summer. Okay, so just before we wrap up, I just want to plug a couple the projects of mine. So this is not my only YouTube channel. I have a sister channel called Peter Squared, where I cover topics related to film and media entertainment in a more formal video essay format, a scripted format. The video we have up right now is called A Closer Look at Frozen, where, you guessed it, I take a closer look at the Disney film Frozen, using these two kind of versions of myself, this older and younger version of myself, to kind of explore what went right, what went wrong, and everything in between. Really would be a super huge help if you could go check that channel out, go subscribe, go watch that video, go like. You can find the link in the description below. Also want to give a plug to the podcast I do with my fiancée Viviana called Now That's What I Call Franchise, where we pick a film franchise and we go through every single installment, the good, the bad, and the ugly. We're currently doing the Addams Family franchise, and our latest episode was on the 1993 film The Addams Family Values, or strike the Addams Family Values. You can listen wherever you get your podcasts. It's also on YouTube if that's your preferred way to listen to podcasts. You can also find the link to our main page in the description below. And then finally, I want to plug Cinema QSO is not just a YouTube channel. It started as and still is a Substack newsletter where I write more formal written reviews of new films being released every week. I've kind of been on a hiatus because I've been traveling. I had my fiancée Viviana's graduation this past weekend in Iowa, and then the weekend before that was my best friend's from growing up, his wedding, and then the weekend before that was his bachelor party. So I've been very busy. I've not had the time to go see anything new as of late, but I'm hopefully in the next week or so kind of starting back into it. You can find the link in the description below, or you can just go to cinemancuso.substack.com. I'm Peter Mancuso. Thank you so much for watching. If you haven't already, please like the live stream, please subscribe, please share this with your friends. We're so close to 100 subscribers. I'm really excited to continue to grow this community with all of you. Until next week, peace out. Bye-bye.